The death and destruction inflicted by Israel on the people of Gaza is unprecedented. Thousands of Palestinians have been killed by Israeli warplanes and shelling. The number of children who've been killed has shocked the world. Yet despite this relentless bombardment, Israel insists on invading Gaza by land, with the United Nations warning that such military action will only cause more death and more destruction. Since 2008, Israel has waged 5 wars on the besieged Gaza Strip, 2 of which have included ground invasions. But in each of these wars, Tel Aviv has failed to defeat Hamas, with the Palestinian faction only getting stronger. Let's take a sidebar and talk about what can be achieved from a ground invasion. We'll talk to Danny Ayalon, a former foreign minister for Israel. Mr. Ayalon, thanks for joining us. I want to start by asking you about the current war. It's gone on now for 19 days. Before we get into the facts and figures, I just want to understand exactly what is Israel trying to achieve from this war?
Yes, well, I would say, Jamal, first of all, Israel is still licking its wounds. We still have hundreds of wounded in hospitals. There are still a few hundred people who were not even identified because their bodies were so mutilated and burned together. So there's a lot of forensic work now. On the front line, what we have here is that pretty much the IDF is in position and formations to enter into Gaza. And of course, the idea here is to call for the people of Gaza to get out of harm's way. And here, Jamal, let me explain one thing. I know that there were some rumors that Israel wants another Nakba to displace Palestinians from the north. Or what we're doing here is what we ask the population of Gaza is what we ask the population of Israel to move themselves out of the front line. So Israel also displaced tens of thousands of Israelis from our border, also from the north, by the way. And what we are asking is for the people of Gaza that are not involved with Hamas, ISIS, is to move to the southern part of Gaza, and then we can confront Hamas, like man to man, without their involvement.
That sounds very well and good, Mr. Ayalon, but if you don't mind, I want to quote Ariel Palner, who's an Israeli politician from the Likud party, and I know that you were a member of the Likud party, or at least served as an advisor to Ariel Sharon back in the day. He says, now there is only one goal, Nakba, a Nakba in Gaza that will dwarf the Nakba of 1948. So they're not really rumors when Israeli politicians, members of the Knesset, are openly calling for it, is it?
Yeah, I'll tell you, I don't know this, Mr. Kellner, myself, but I think this is the wrong thing to say and also the wrong thing to think. Maybe his blood is boiling, but if he doesn't understand the meaning, I don't think that the government of Israel is thinking in this way. This guy, Mr. Kellner, which I said I don't know him, I don't know why he said it, but it's just not true.
There was, as you mentioned, calls by the Israeli military for Palestinians to leave northern Gaza and to go towards southern Gaza. However, the bombing that has taken place, Mr. Ayalon, did not limit to northern Gaza. In fact, there was much of the bombing that took place on southern Gaza, as well as obviously even close to the border with Egypt and Rafah. So what trust should Palestinians have that they will not be targeted, considering the sheer amount of death and destruction that they've seen over the past 18, 19 days?
Sure. Well, first of all, yes. There are, unfortunately, there are many positions of Hamas also in Khan Yunis and near the Rafah border, crossing border with Egypt, all over. But we are trying to be very precise. And yes, there are operations there, but in a very precision way. We have guidance, special guidance munitions. And what we target is basically where we see headquarters or munition caches or control and command.
Okay, so again, I need to take you up on this because you're talking about precision. Currently, as we speak now, there have been 5,791 Palestinians killed. That literally translates to 13 Palestinians being killed every hour, essentially one every 4.6 minutes. Out of them, that is one child every 11 minutes. How many Hamas fighters have you killed out of those?
So I'm glad this is very important, because these numbers are not the true numbers. These are numbers that Hamas is putting out, and we have to remember, Hamas is still controlling the hospitals in Gaza, whether it's Shifa or the other hospital that Hamas itself bombed by mistake, Islamic Jihad did, and the numbers are totally different. And what we have here is that at least 3,000 Hamas people were killed or injured.
But they're giving the names. They're giving the names. They're showing the videos of them. Maybe, okay, let me ask you this. Why don't you allow for members of the press and for the United Nations and the other international organizations to enter Gaza to prove your point then, if that's the case? If Hamas are making up these numbers, if this isn't the true cost of the death and destruction, why don't you allow for the media to cross over and for the international community to enter Gaza?
I think that's a very good idea. I think that we should do that. And at the same time, once the international press and the Red Cross is going into Gaza, they should also go and visit our kidnapped and hostages over there, and to make sure that they are also okay, and maybe even bring them out. I think this is something that absolutely.
So why hasn't Netanyahu done this? Why has the government prevented them from entering? Why is this the case?
I think because Hamas has not agreed yet to have the Red Cross visiting the hostages. I think this is where
I'm not talking about the hostages here. I'm talking about allowing people to enter, to document, without them being obviously killed. Because, there are several journalists that have been killed. There have been several journalist buildings that have been targeted by the Israelis inside Gaza. Obviously, not least my own colleagues and previously our buildings in Gaza. So is there a commitment now? Are you trying to say now that Israel will allow for, or should allow for, journalists and independent organizations to enter Gaza?
I think this is something that can be arranged, but without the involvement of Hamas. It has to be someone else, because what Hamas is doing actually is using the people of Gaza as human shields. You know that who can, in his right mind, put launching pads of rockets in hospitals or in mosques or in
But we haven't seen any evidence of this. Have you seen? Because it hasn't been shared with the world, at least, of video evidence of launching pads in hospitals, or, for example, the church that was bombed, one of the oldest churches in the world that was bombed by the Israelis. Is there any evidence? Do you have, or does the government have, any video evidence that proves this point?
Yes, we do. And I believe that since now we're talking, I will make sure that your request, your idea, will be brought to the people of the Prime Minister's office. And this is a very good point. And I would love, first of all, I hope that really there will be a minimum amount of casualties, certainly among people who are not involved. But I would love to be in touch with you again, and maybe next time we meet, I can put you in touch with somebody in the Prime Minister's office or the spokesman of the IDF to able to get you all the footage that is available. And there's a lot of footage available, unfortunately.
So Israel has been amassing tanks and ground forces now for several weeks. What's your view on this potential ground incursion or ground invasion?
Well, I think that there is one way still to avoid and prevent a ground invasion, by using international norms of war and peace and calling on Hamas for an unconditional surrender. This is what the Allied forces back in 1945 demanded from the Nazis. And if there is an unconditional surrender, that means they come out of their bunkers underneath the hospitals and all that, then there won't need to be a ground operation. But I don't believe that they would do that. If Hamas will say, okay, unconditional surrender, then I think a ground, let's say, operation can be avoided and prevented.
So you are calling for Hamas, which describes itself, you obviously describe them as terrorists. They describe themselves as resistance fighters to unconditionally surrender. And you're saying this is an option. There is another proposition that they would suggest and others would suggest, which is that Israel unconditionally ceases and stops its illegal occupation of Palestinian lands and stops or lifts the siege over Gaza, which has been described as one of the world's largest open-air prisons, or the world's largest open-air prison. Why is that not an option for the Israelis, to stop the illegal occupation, to release the 10,000 Palestinian prisoners, of which there are about 700 children inside, to stop the targeted assassinations and to lift the siege? Why is that not an option?
I'll tell you why. It could be an option, but with a different interlocutor, not with Hamas. Hamas is ISIS, and Hamas has taken itself out of humanity. And you see how the United States, how the European, how the Japanese, everybody is calling Hamas ISIS. And with Hamas ISIS, there is no negotiation. That's why there is unconditional surrender. Unconditional surrender means that they have to put out their arms, and they have no right to make any conditions. Now, if we do see a different leadership of Palestinians, and I hope that once this war in Gaza is over, we will see a different Palestinian leadership that believes in coexistence, then we can negotiate all the way up to a Palestinian state.
Mr. Ayalon, I'll come back to the negotiations, because obviously there is precedence to it in terms of Oslo and other things. But if you allow me, I just want to deconstruct something to understand it a bit more and for our viewers to understand. You've just compared, and obviously it's been a talking point by the Israelis and the Americans, as you mentioned, and even the French. We heard it from Macron during his visit, comparing Hamas to ISIS. And the logic, correct me if I'm wrong, is that Hamas committed crimes on October 7th. It attacked civilians, and we've heard to the end of it, and more than 1,000 Israelis were killed on that day, and therefore they are akin to ISIS. Is that correct? That's the logic?
Yes, and all you have to do, Jamal, is look at their own footage. They had this GoPro, how they rape women and children. I mean,
we haven't seen any footage of rape. But what I want to ask you here is that if this is the logic, why is it not then also logical to compare Israel to ISIS? Because Israel has also killed children. We have seen pictures and videos of decapitated children who had their heads blown off. Yes, not maybe by somebody on the ground, but from an F-15 or bombs and shells. In fact, there are now almost 6,000 people who have been killed over the past 18, 19 days. Why is one seen to be ISIS-like and the other not? What is the difference between your killing of Palestinians versus the other?
The difference is there is an aggressor, then there is somebody with self-defense. When you have self-defense, and again, I go back, we are not targeting children. If there are any, God forbid, children who die because of Israeli attacks, it's because Hamas is using kindergartens and they're using them as human shields. But you see, Jamal, it's just like you cannot put the United States as terrorists after they did what they did in Hiroshima and Nagasaki.
Many people can. In fact, you can. You can. If you are using an atomic bomb on civilians, that is terrorizing them. There's no argument about it. That is the definition.
But the international community has accepted it as self-defense war. In Dresden, they obliterate Dresden in Germany.
But there is a difference here, Mr. Ayalon, which is Japan was not occupying the United States. The argument that is being presented to you, and I'm presenting here an argument, the argument that is being presented to you, Mr. Ayalon, and to the Israelis, is that Israel is what has been described by even Beit Salem, inflicting apartheid, has a system of apartheid that it is exerting on an indigenous population, that Israel has forcibly displaced people from their cities, from their towns in Palestine, that for the past 75 years, you have illegally occupied land that does not belong to you. And as you rightly said, there is an aggressor and there is those in self-defense. You are pitching yourself as the person in self-defense. The other side is telling you that is not correct. In fact, you are the aggressor because you are occupying land, you are besieging 2 million people, you are implementing a system of apartheid. And this is what I want to ask you about.
Okay, so I will give you now the counter argument, which is corroborated by the facts. And that is that from 1937 on, the international community, even before the UN was existed, you know what? I can talk even San Remo agreement, the League of Nations. I don't want to go into the details. The international community, and I challenge anyone to go and look at the documents of the international community back from 1917 on. There was an idea of partition, that Palestine would be, what is Palestine? Palestine was never an independent sovereign state. Palestine is a Roman name, but I don't want to go to history. Palestine by the UN, let's say the latest time was 1947, was partitioned because they saw that there were two peoples here vying for the same land. The Jews said, well, it's all ours. The Arabs of Palestine said it's all ours. So the UN said, okay, we will do what is logical, partition an Arab state and a Jewish state. The Jews, you see, accepted. The Arabs did not accept. And since then, we have refusal every time. Last refusal was by Arafat in 2000, Camp David. Abu Mazen, 2007, in Annapolis in the United States. So this is why when you talk to us about occupation, we say no, it's not occupation, because we are ready to leave the area, but we are not ready to leave the area and give it to Hamas type. That's why we have to do negotiations.
Mr. Ayalon, Hamas didn't exist in 1967, did it?
No, but at that time was the PLO. You know, the PLO, Palestinian, what is PLO? Palestine Liberation Organization.
Yes.
What did they want to liberate in 1965? In 1965, Israel was not in the West Bank. Jordan was in the West Bank. Israel was not in Gaza. Egypt was in Gaza. So what did they want to liberate in 1965? They wanted to liberate my own home here in Tel Aviv. So this is why I'm saying it's you have to get the facts right, and then if you have the truth right,
the facts. Well, this is the issue. You are coming obviously, and I don't want to dwell too much on history, but just to wrap this point, and we can move on to looking forward to other scenarios. But your history starts with petition, or your reference point is petition, albeit, by the way, that the United Nations has issued many resolutions which Israel doesn't want to abide by, but for some reason is holding on to this petition as a sacred kind of thing that it will abide by. But the history of many Palestinians is well before that there are Palestinians who live in what they call historical Palestine, that they were expelled from their homes, whether it was on what now is Tel Aviv or in Haifa or in cities like villages like Deir Yassin that's witnessed many massacres. And for them, why is an occupation that takes place beyond the 1967 borders bad, but an occupation that takes place within the 1967 borders good? And that is an argument there. Without going into it, there is a reality. And the reality here is, and this is what we want to talk about right now, is that this is the fifth war that Israel is waging on Gaza. Each time it has waged the war since it's disengaged, or since it's, let's say, withdrew the illegal settlements in Gaza, the announced target and aim of it was to destroy Hamas. You have failed every single time. In fact, not only have you failed miserably, because Hamas's rockets in the beginning could barely reach Sderot. Now they can reach every single corner of historic Palestine or Israel. Now, in this question here is, what are you going to achieve from a ground invasion? What are you going to achieve from this bombardment, aside from the huge, monumental loss of life that we continue to see every single day?
Well, I think, Jamal, the answer is in your question. The reason Israel failed in the last 5 rounds is because there was no ground operation, and you cannot just.
You entered in 2014. You did enter on the ground.
Yeah, but it was minimal. If you look at it, it was only at the outskirts. We didn't really go in because at that time there was a debate. Hamas at that time offered a ceasefire and a hudna and everything like that, and there was a debate in the Israeli government in 2014. You're right, whether to go all the way or to stop. And the decision was to stop. And you know what? Mr. Netanyahu, the prime minister, is going to pay a political price. After the war is over, now Israeli people say to him, you failed, because for the last 5 rounds, just as you say, you promised to do away with Hamas and you didn't. So I think after this war, we will have a re-election and the Likud will not win, and Netanyahu will retire from politics.
Mr. Ayalon, there is, and you're talking about the Israeli public. Obviously, there is a lot of dissatisfaction within Israeli society, some of it internal with regards to the Supreme Court and other things, and some of it with regards to how Israel has been behaving itself, quite frankly, with regards to the Palestinians. We've seen large scale protests by friends and families of those who are currently in Gaza that are captives within Hamas. But we're also seeing, and I believe you worked on trying to promote Aliyah, or the migration of non-Israeli Jews to Israel to get Israeli citizenship. We've also seen large-scale numbers of Israelis leaving Israel. The last statistic I found from 2020 said that 756,000 Israelis had left Israel to other countries because they were unhappy, not necessarily because of violence, but actually because of the economic situation and because of a kind of lack of trust that Israel can be a home for them. We're now in 2023. You're currently, as you say, witnessed the worst military inflicted, I won't call it defeat, the war continues, but one of the worst days militarily in Israel's history, okay? You have a government that has failed miserably to achieve any of its aims with regards to either making peace or militarily. What is your kind of assessment of how things move on for Israel?
Yeah, well, I would say as far as the demography goes, back in 1948, the War of Independence, what we call it, which was a war of independence. This is when we established the state. By the way, Jamal, I also, you know the Quran, I know my Bible, the Christians know, that when you talk about the land of Israel or Zion, and what is Zionism? It's from Zion. It's a biblical name. Jews lived here 4,000 years ago. So it's not that we are visitors here. But I would say that let's go from 1948 until now. In 1948,
Danny, I can't let that one slide. Sorry.
I know.
To go back 4,000 years ago, we would be changing the demographics of every single country in the world if we're to trace our lineage. I might find that I'm the rightful owner of the White House, for God's sake. So it doesn't really I don't think that's a legitimate discussion to have here.
But I would add here another thing is that from 4,000 years ago until now, there was all the time, there was a continuous presence of Jews here, even though we were occupied.
And there was a continuous presence of Arabs. By the way, it's not an ethnicity here. You're looking at it from an ethnicity. As far as Arabs are concerned, there are Jewish Arabs, and there is Arabs, Muslims, and Christian Arabs, and there are atheist Arabs. But the point is, that land, if we're going to go there, that land, the predominant majority of those living in what is Palestine in 1948, pre-1948, were Arabs. And the predominant number of Israelis currently now, including your parents, came from European countries or came from the United States.
My father came from
Algeria. And your mother came from Poland.
Yes.
Yes.
Right. What I'm saying here is that this is why was the partition was, if you look at the partition map of the UN back in 1947, indeed, Israel was getting a very sliver of land according to where the Jewish population majorities were, and where the Arabs were was to be Palestine or the Arab state. Now, I go back to the demographics, it's very important. In 1948, there were 600,000 Jews in the land. 600,000, that was all. Today, there are 8 million. In the land, plus 2 million Israeli Arabs, which we appreciate, and they are our, like co-citizens and
more like second-class citizens. But you can.
I hope not. I hope not. But there a lot of things can be done. But anyway, what I'm saying is that the trend is that we multiply from 600,000 back in 48. We are now 8 million, and if we look at the demographics, we're going to be 15 millions by 2050. It is true. You said 750. I'll tell you it's more. 900,000 Israelis live abroad. That means they left Israel, but we're talking about from 1948 until today. 900 left, but many more came. And because Israel has the largest birth rate, in the let's say in the Western world, the numbers, we are very optimistic about the numbers because there are more and more coming here. So
I want to finish off with a final question here, if you don't mind. It seems my understanding from what you're saying is that you believe Israel and the Israeli military needs to go into Gaza on foot, and it needs to essentially go a lot deeper than it did in 2014. You have more than 200 captives currently now inside Gaza in the hands of Hamas or other Palestinian groups there. And as you mentioned, and as we both agreed, Israel has failed militarily in the past to defeat Hamas. And here is the final question: some people will say there's no logic in trying to do the same thing over and over again if it's failed. And there is this rejection to look at the responsibility of the Israeli occupation in leading us to where we are today. Is there, in your view, any space for a reassessment and a look within to see that as much as it is easier to blame acts of violence, as you would put them, for where we are today, to look at the acts of violence perpetrated by the Israelis and to look at the continuous ignoring of international law and UN resolutions as the source of the problem of where we are today?
There will definitely be a reassessment. But first and foremost, we have to just neutralize Hamas with all its terrorist activities. And this is the goal now. Later on, when we left Gaza in 2005, the idea was that Gaza will become a Singapore. What was the idea? That the Palestinian Authority will take over, will start cooperating on, Gaza has a beautiful shoreline. It could be a great area for tourism industry and agriculture and everything else. What happened, if you recall, in 2007, Hamas did a coup d'etat. They perpetrated a coup against the Palestinian Authority. They took over Gaza, and since then, everything went downhill. So the lesson we have here
that's a very glossed over history of what's happened, Mr. Ayalon. We all know, and I'm sure you know as well, the impact of the blockade on Gaza, the siege on Gaza, land, air, and sea. In fact, I believe you were Assistant Foreign Minister at the time when there was a civilian attempt to break that blockade through an aid flotilla, which was also attacked in international waters by the Israeli military, killing 10 peace activists at the time. Thank you very much, though. That is all we have time for on this episode of Sidebar. Thank you for joining us, Mr. Danny Ayalon.
My pleasure, Jamal.